Illinois politicians want to change the word offender to justice-impacted individuals. Let's talk about it on Azimuth Podcast. I'm Kimberly McNabb, and with me is Barrett McNabb.
Thanks, Kimberly. So the name change makes criminals sound less dangerous, right? But it also sounds like, one way you could actually refer to the victim instead of the criminal. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, this is all just jargon. I mean, words, they're employed to deceive rather than communicate clearly here. And to boot, amongst Democratic elites, changing language is used to make others feel inadequate while you're with the in crowd. I mean, come on, these are criminals.
Couldn't agree more. Yep.
They broke the law. They offended the public, so they should be called offenders. Don't do the crime if you don't want to be offended. This isn't about their feelings, though. I mean, it's about the elites reading the documents for their feelings. So, and it also makes the criminals seem less dangerous. So, it's easy for their dainty little eyes to go easier on the criminals after reading the language of justice-impacted individuals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree, Kimberly. I mean, one of the things that, if you notice whenever you have a criminal case, and let's just say that that's a murder, right? Mm-hmm. And Janet Smith was murdered by Sylvester Dominguez. Okay, I just made up those names, right? The case is not Smith versus Dominguez. Right? That's not, so when you talk about getting justice for an individual, the case isn't the two parties, the victim and the offender. It is the state of Michigan versus Dominguez, right? Because the crime is not being punished against the individual, the victim. The crime was committed against society as a whole, right? And so when you are, saying justice impacted individuals, this just doesn't make any sense because, again, it's the state versus the offender. And if you're using justice impacted, I mean, like you said, the victim could be justice impacted as well, right?
Well, especially if you're letting them off the hook.
Yeah. And also what's as far as having to save the planet, having to have paper and reprint all the documents and things like that, it's going to cost thousands of dollars to change the language in all of the state's agencies. I mean, changing happy to glad and glad to sad, it has second and third order effects. I mean, taxpayers have to pay to have all of those changes met. And I can promise you, it's not going to be an addendum that's shoved at the beginning of whatever document that says, hey, just let you know, we've made this change, and so just go ahead and in your mind, change it in the document. No, they're going to reprint all those documents.
Yeah, where are the client activists now? Oh, save the trees.
Yeah, exactly. and again, they're criminals. The harsh language needs to stay, and they need to put their big boy pants on. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time, right? Honestly, this is ridiculous. It really is. But when we act benevolently towards cruel people, ultimately they become, and we be cruel to the general public. Again, it goes to that broken windows theory of when you are letting crimes, small petty crimes, go by, it's going to exacerbate the problem, and you'll start to see bigger crimes, right? So, when we see in Oregon where they are putting rapists on panels alongside victims to look at recidivism rates and how to better look at their parole and things like that. Again, it's bad behavior on the part of the government.
They're being nice to the wrong people.
Yeah,
Be nice to the victims. Get justice for them.
Exactly.
But, unfortunately, we see this everywhere. Here at home with our crime, not prosecuting and, releasing criminals. And we see it at our borders. We're letting everyone in. And then, they go off and they kill Laken Riley in Georgia or punch cops in the face in New York or kill a 2-year-old boy in Maryland.
Right.
Because we feel sorry for the immigrants. Why do we feel sorry for future victims? Why do we feel sorry for our own citizens who are having to pay for it? We see this overseas as well. We surrender to terrorism, by agreeing to conduct diplomatic negotiations with terrorist organizations, which only encourages further terrorism.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting about this as well is we've talked about George Carlin, amazing comedian. When he passed, it was just a travesty to comedic genius overall. I mean, he's just absolutely funny, and we've mentioned this before, but he had the evolution of language as well, and talking about the softening, this generalized softening. And so when you look at World War I, you had shell shock.
Right.
Shell shock. I mean, it tells you exactly what happened to you, right? And then as you get into World War II, the language was changed to combat fatigue. So, you can see a softening of the language. And then the language that we use today and was transitioned or first started in Vietnam was the post-traumatic stress disorder. And so to go from shell shock to PTSD, you can see that continuous softening of the language. And he had a whole bit on that, just softening it up.
Well, yes, and also you can get PTSD from a lot of things, not just war. That's obviously one of the worst causes of it.
Right.
But, this amendment also adds members to the Adult Redeploy Illinois Oversight Board.
Yeah, when you told me about that, I was like, oh, what?
Yeah, one of these. Anytime I hear a board or a committee, I'm like, that's just an excuse for someone to get paid to seem like they're doing something, but really probably not doing much. And so what this does is it provides financial incentives to jurisdictions for diverting people convicted of non-violent crimes from prisons to community-based services like rehab to promote equity and to diversify the board and enhance funding flexibility. So, when the government says funding flexibility, I'm like, I'm wondering what that means. Enhanced funding, board members get paid, right?
Right.
Well, so wouldn't that just cost the taxpayers more? That's what I hear. But instead of promoting equity and diversity, what about promoting objective measures like effectiveness, like people commit less crimes?
Yeah, I would have to say that when you are again softening the language, and these are not criminals anymore. I mean, what are the second and third order effects? Job applications, right? Have you ever committed a felony? I believe is on a job application. I don't really recall if there's a misdemeanor line on there, but definitely have you ever been convicted of a felony is on there.
And it could be confusing if you have one set of documents that calls the same thing one thing,
sure, yep.
And then you go to apply for a job and it says, have you ever committed a felony? Well, they didn't call it that.
Right.
So no. Well, you lied.
Right. And if you also, how is this going to affect people who are cross state boundaries? So like Gary, Indiana is at the very northwest corner of Indiana, and it's right by Chicago. Right. Mm-hmm. So you've got people that are possibly committing crimes in Gary, Indiana, and then they cross over into Chicago. How does that language impact them? Because the language isn't being changed in Indiana.
Right.
So I mean, this is just localized, but it just seems as though some of the more left-leaning states, they really like to push the envelope, and I'd have to say New York State, Illinois, California, they like to stretch the boundaries and then get the other states to follow suit. Right. So there's whatever program that California has, they like to tell, we're first in the nation to do X. Right. So this is going to be one of those. Illinois, we're first in the nation to soften the language used to define criminals.
Well, to be the first of something's not always a good thing. Like change is not always a good thing. I go in and rob a bank. I'm the first one in my family to rob a bank. Okay, that's not a good thing. Oh, I created change in the bank because it has less cash.
Right.
Not necessarily a good thing, but, a lot of times the softening of language is also very divisive, and it makes it harder for people and agencies to speak to each other. And
That's a good
I think
point.
that's a primary goal, is to create chaos and divisiveness and confusion everywhere they go, under the guise of, oh, aren't we the nice ones?
Right.
I call BS.
Well, yeah, especially since obviously the criminals aren't the nice ones. And again, I think that if you soften this up to, free hugs, you're just going to see more crime, because as we've seen, when bail is reduced, states and the municipalities introduce no cash bail. Here in Houston, we have, not enough police officers. And so there's not enough manpower to solve and go through all the cases they have. And so you've got people who have been arrested for murder, get bail, and they're out on the street committing more murder, just because the police can't investigate the cases.
Well, it may also attract out-of-state crime.
We've actually talked about that.
Yeah, like in Portland, they decriminalized drugs, and people came and were like, "Hey, I can do all the drugs I want here."
Right, and also we had talked about people from New York. Committing crimes in New York and then going to Florida, with
I'm not
the
sure why they
spoils.
thought they could do that.
Yeah, I mean, Florida said, look, if you commit crime here and go back up to New York, we're going to catch you and we're going to throw you in jail.
Yeah.
So don't try it the inverse way. But I think this is systemic of all languages being softened.
Mm-hmm.
It's not helping. All it's doing is enabling.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. So we saw this and we wanted to bring it to your attention. So thank you for tuning in to Azimuth Podcast. Please stay tuned after these messages.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our show with all the stories we share, we would love your support.
And it's as easy as clicking that subscribe or follow button. This will ensure you never miss an episode and keeps us bringing you these important stories. Your support makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family.
Thanks, and keep tuning in.